Well, good morning, everybody. It's Neil Foley here again from the Business Growth Club. Really fortunate today to have Jan Roberts with us from Inspire Norfolk, who's an expert in all things with apprentices. How are you today then, Jan?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me here, and I'm really pleased to be talking about apprenticeships.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, thank you. And what we would hope is once you listen to the podcast, that you understand more about what the world of apprentices actually is, how it might fit for your business, and the next steps, if you like, if you were interested in finding out more. That's what we'll hope to explain to you. So, Jen, let's kick off with a very broad question. Why would somebody take on an apprentice?
I think there's a lot of reasons, really. If we kind of consider the business, if you are looking to grow your business, but might not be in a position where you could employ, from a sort of financial perspective, could employ a full-time member of staff, an apprenticeship is really a good place to go. There is a financial investment in it, but it also means that you can grow and develop a young person in the way that your business is developing. So, for example, lots of businesses say to me, I want another me. So the only way that they're going to do that is by growing and developing and nurturing someone into that kind of mould. So apprenticeships are a really good opportunity to do that. It also gives a young person a great start in the world of work. And having that nurturing environment for them is a very good thing. It also offers young people an alternative to, say, university. They won't end up with the huge great debt or the damage to their liver. They won't end up with, coming out with one set qualification and then having to find work experience that kind of matches that. Apprenticeships can be very, very organic for them. So they might start doing a business admin and then move on to a finance qualification. They might start with a business admin and go into a leadership, supervision, management direction.
Do you mean some of them don't know when they're first starting what they want necessarily?
Did you? Do you know what you want to do now?
No. So when you're really young, I suppose.
Yes, and I always envy those people that have a real vocation. That's want to be a policeman, want to be a whatever. But young people have so much choice now. So to go into the world of work, it could be that they go into business, as I say, with a very broad kind of business admin qualification, and then say if they were working in an accountant's or a law firm or a marketing company, they might stay as sort of an office manager type role, or they may go into finance, digital marketing, an AAT course, so they can actually specialise kind of after that. So it just gives them a little bit of a leeway. Or it gives them a little bit of opportunity to kind of have a year to find their feet. And is
it a year then? Is that what typically an apprenticeship is?
An apprenticeship has to be legally a year and a day. So the minimum is a year and a day. Yeah. But dependent upon the needs of the business, dependent upon what might happen during that time, it's sort of a general office type apprenticeship. Could be anything from a year to 18 months. And the training providers try to be as supportive as possible with that. Obviously, if you're looking at any of the trades or other kind of specialised apprenticeships, they could be longer.
And historically, I always thought that like an apprenticeship people served. I mean, when I first came to Norwich, there were people doing typesetting apprenticeships and might have been 6 or 7 years.
Yes.
So now it's a year and a day minimum, but are some of them longer than that?
Some of them are. As I say, some of the trades are a minimum of 18 months to 2 years.
Okay.
But they're all very specific.
And is it the bit that I get a bit confused with on the apprenticeship side? Is the apprentice going to be with me 5 days a week, or is it a day release where they go to college or whatever?
Again, that varies with the course. So with something like business admin and customer service, all delivered in the workplace. So that employee is with you for a minimum of 30 hours a week. So anything over and above that, it's fine. And all of their assessment and training is delivered in the workplace.
By me?
No. You will deliver some on-the-job training as
Yep.
you would with any other employee, but they will have an assessor assigned to them who will come in on a regular basis, but they'll also have an e-portfolio, so they'll upload tasks online. It may be some witness statements, some observations. That said, they are changing from frameworks to standards. All gets a bit complicated.
Okay.
So if anybody wants any specific
They need
information,
to ask.
give me a call.
And I guess from what you said, this is a movable feast as well. Some bits
Yes.
haven't been determined.
Yes,
as
yes.
yet.
There have been some big changes from the 1st of May, and I think we're all kind of getting to grips with those.
Right.
But I think if anybody wants to know specifics at the moment, either give myself a call or one of the training providers or the skills funding agency.
And I guess that's where I get confused. There seem to be so many people in the arena, whereas from an employer's viewpoint, you think, where do you go? Do you go to people like you to start with to say, help me select an apprentice and the appropriate training?
We differ. We're not a training provider.
Mm-hmm.
So we are essentially a recruitment agency.
Yep.
So we support a business to do the recruitment side of it. What we can do that maybe the training providers won't do is be a little bit more hands-on. It all came about when I had one particular tradesman who had never had an interview in his life. So I sort of said to him, "Oh, and that's when you interview the people," and I could see the look of terror on his face.
Yep.
So we basically did all of the shortlisting for him. We then wrote the questions for the interview, attended the interview with him, gave the feedback to the young people, so that he didn't have to do any of those thanks but no thanks calls. Some training providers will do that,
Okay.
others don't. So if you need that extra bit of support, Inspire Norfolk's where you might want to start. If you're set up, you're happy to do interviewing, you're happy to make all your calls, texts, emails to young people, then probably a training provider is fine. But we will also be there through the first 3 months of the probation if anyone has any queries.
Yeah. So there is a probationary period, is there, on the apprenticeship route?
Yes. Like any other employee, you should always put in a probationary period. We always say 3 months, but like any HR person will tell you, if they're not achieving
Then
at
you
any
just
time,
extend it.
you can extend it. Yes, yeah.
And when you said there's an assessor who comes in, is that like an NVQ? Is
Yes.
it an NVQ level 2 or
yes.
whatever?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So the assessor will mark them against criteria. The difference with the frameworks and the standards is that the frameworks were assessed throughout. The standards, I believe, now are going to be assessed sort of towards the end.
Right, okay.
So in a very different way. Some training providers have moved to them immediately. Others are sort of working through and will be changing over the course of the next sort of 6 to 12 months.
And is there a conflict in the sense that presumably the training providers want to get them through and passed so that the assessments are a little bit lackadaisical or a bit Mickey Mouse in terms of, or do they take it seriously?
I think that comes down to the integrity of the sort of people working there, really.
Does it? The assessor, do you mean?
Well, a little bit of both, probably. There are always going to be unscrupulous providers, and I think if you look at sort of their results, their statistics, which you can see online.
Oh, can you? Okay.
You can make a judgment call. I think.
So
it's
will you see some of
always-
the stats very high pass marks?
Yes, yeah.
Right.
And I think Norfolk is a village.
Yep.
So word of mouth recommendation is always
Yep.
a good one. If you speak to another business that's had an apprentice before, which training provider they used. Some training providers might be better at delivering certain courses, and some work better for bigger, smaller businesses.
Yes.
So I think that's very much down to
Bit of
kind of
research.
the individual company and a bit of research. Yes. Yeah.
And age-wise for the apprentice? Because what surprised me, there's a member of the Business Growth Club who took an apprentice off on probably a couple of years ago now, and he was early 20s.
Yes.
And I don't know why, I had it in my mind they were sort of 16 to 18-year-olds.
No, up until the 1st of May, 16 to 24 was funded.
Okay.
Now, anyone can take an apprenticeship. So you or I could start one.
Yeah.
Also, if you have done a university degree, that used to preclude you. Now, as long as it's a different form of training, then you are able to do an apprenticeship. But we then get into the sort of minutiae of all of the funding.
Yes,
so again,
which is all
probably
moving.
Best to have a little chat with somebody about all of that.
Is the funding is the bit that's changing the amount that you have to pay the apprentice, or is that?
No, at the moment that's still £3.50 an hour,
regardless of age.
£3.50 in their first year.
Okay.
And then that always goes up sort of around about the 1st of October.
Okay.
But so that bit's staying, but it's the funding. There used to be what was called the apprenticeship grant for employers.
Mm-hmm.
That has changed. That's only going to be, or there's only going to be a grant available for 16 to 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
And it's paid in 2 lots.
Right. Okay.
Whereas they used to get it all in one hit after the young person had been in work for 13 weeks.
Right. Okay.
So it's much more about funding the younger apprentices rather than anyone 19 plus at the moment.
Okay. And in your experience, are most employers paying the minimum, or because presumably you can pay more or have some, commission schemes or an enhancement?
Again, yes, it's down to the individuals. I sort of don't put any focus on it. It's their company.
Do you know what they do?
Most companies start off at the minimum and then might use that as a sort of enhancement, a bit of a carrot. I always encourage, if they obviously because of the transport issues here, if somebody needs to drive to get to a location, then employers might need to consider either giving some benefits in terms of mileage or something to support. If it's a fair distance and their travel again impacts, then there might be some support for that. But I think it's best used to kind of as a bit of a kind of goal for them. But yes, I think £3.50 throughout an entire apprenticeship might be a little tricky for some, especially where you're employing somebody that might be living independently. Yes, that's it.
If they're living at home, I guess, and you're relatively young.
If you're a 16-year-old living at home and earning £3.50 an hour, it's not bad. You wouldn't get that if you went to college. So,
So there must be a big difference then between apprentices in the city areas and then in the rural areas. The rural ones presumably are more problematic because of transport, because public transport is so pretty lousy, isn't it? Yes,
it is tricky, and we find that with sort of working hours. We've got a position that we're advertising at the moment, and their ideal hours are 7:30 till 4:30, but the bus doesn't get in till 8.
Right.
So we can't kind of say we must have a driver.
No.
But they're going to have to be flexible until, if the right person doesn't drive, then they need to be flexible until such time as they do, or they just need to be flexible with those hours.
Yeah, just accept that's going to change.
But I think that's kind of the nature of the beast, working and living in Norfolk, is it not?
Yeah, I think it is rurally, isn't it? Okay.
I think the one of the other difficulties, if we've got an employer that's a little bit out of the city on a bus route, and they forget that if that young person lives out the other side of the city, that they need to get one bus in and then one bus out.
Yes.
And that's
quite a long journey, isn't
quite a fair journey.
Yes. And in terms of interviewing young people, if you're doing that and you're saying that's the service that you offer, that's quite a challenge, isn't it? Because a lot of the young people won't be overconfident, will they? Because if you were, this is a big generalisation, but if you're confident thinking, I want to be a doctor or a dentist or an accountant, you go to university. And these are people who are, finding their way, aren't they? So that must be a real challenge.
Some of them. Sometimes it's more challenging to stop the employers talking about themselves.
Really? So the employers are as bad as or worse?
It's interesting. They'll talk a lot, and then they'll let the young person walk out of the interview and say, oh, I like them. And I ask how they know they like
Really?
them, because they didn't ask any questions. So that's why I'm there.
Yes.
So we can steer them, or, you know, if all else fails, stop them and actually ask the questions myself.
Really?
I think young people, it can be quite nerve-wracking. It is probably one of the first times that they've had interviews. We do a little bit of coaching with them. We do another aspect of the service, which is a sort of bespoke support, where we will work with a young person specifically to get them into work. But when I'm supporting the business is my main focus. So I don't want to be able to coach the young person so they perform on the day, and then actually when they get there to do the job, they haven't got the sort of wherewithal. So we do support them, and we do give them an indication of the kind of questions. And, you know, if they're asked where they want to be in 5 years, they don't say married with babies, or you know, it's got to be career related, or, you know, something. So we do give a bit of coaching, and yet that they've got or often not got a huge amount of experience to draw on. So those questions that we might answer in an interview,
They would struggle with.
They would struggle, and so need to look for examples within sort of day-to-day life, or the football team that they belong to, or the guides, or an example of something where they worked in a team at school. So it's that kind of thing, and making them think about those things beforehand.
And is there, because one of the criticisms that you'll hear, I mean, you're not just about apprentices, but recruiting young people generally, is that they're never going to be here for very long, and I train them up and get them experienced and love them, and then lo and behold they disappear. Now, of course, they've got the absolute right to do that. That's what life is, isn't it? But what do you say to an employer who's worried about that, and maybe had their fingers burnt and said, well, I tried it once?
I think there's a lot of employers that do that. Oh, I tried it once. Apprenticeship, you know, the sweeping statements. I think if you build that relationship with a young person, they're less likely to. You know, the ones that really work out are where there's a bit of give and take, and the interview, you know, right from the start, the interview is a conversation. The employer wants to be interviewed as much as they're interviewing the young person. It you know, it can happen with any kind of member of staff that they go off. I think some of the best companies I've worked with are where they say, oh yes, so and so's gone off travelling for a year, but we've told them to come back and see us when they get back. They're young people. They're going to decide to go the other side of the world, and you know, and explore a little bit. So I don't really think there's anything that we can say that will stop that. But I think in investing in a young person, it's a learning curve for the employer as well as for the young person. And, you know, there's a steady stream. So, yes, they might have to start kind of back at the beginning again, but the employer's wiser in terms of employing a young person. So I think it's just the nature of the beast, and they kind of have to accept it, really.
Yes. You don't own anybody, do you, at the end of the day?
No, and it could happen with a sort of full-time older person who's, you know, established, and then suddenly life takes a turn and they win the lottery and they...
Yeah, no, things happen, don't they?
Fly
and
off,
and one of the other criticisms that I nothing to do with apprentices, but it's about employing people, is that, you know, by the time I've explained it to somebody, I could have done it myself. I mean, you must have heard that a few times.
I think we've all done it, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yes, but you explain it a few times, and yes, you've got to take some time out of your day to do that, but eventually, in time, with experience and repeating that activity, the young person will be able to manage. So yes, I think part of our role is to manage the expectations of the employer and the young person in those very early days. And you know, part of the grant was there to sort of support employers for the time when a young person wasn't hugely beneficial to the business. And I think employers have to realise that they are not going to hit the ground running day one. And the number of times I have employers that say, "Oh, I want them experienced in this, experienced in that." You know, it's like, but you're paying £3.50 an hour, and they're straight out of school.
Yep.
Yes, there are young people that come along and they've got all of the experience that they're after, but generally speaking, they need to learn on the job.
And I guess that's true in terms of social media or some of the IT side, that they might be very skilled, but they're still never been employees, have they?
And they're very skilled at doing that to their friends.
Yes.
They still need some guidance and support in terms of doing it for business.
Yeah.
And yes, they haven't been employed. I think I had an employer said, "Oh, you know, we finish at 4 and the young man is packed up by 4:45. If you go into a school,
That's exactly what
before
happens, isn't it?
the bell goes, they're all there ready waiting for the bell.
Yeah.
It's not what we do in the workplace.
No.
And I said to the employer, "Have you told them?" "Well, no." And it's just very obvious. This is very different to being in school. You need to tell them.
Yeah.
And once told, he
They're
was
all right.
fine. Yeah.
And is that true with a lot of employers, that the reality is, because we're often talking about small employers, aren't we, at the end of the day? Actually, they're just not that good at managing staff, are they? You know, in terms of appraisals are for money rather than, you know, so it's once a year, rather than a structure and a process in place just to get the best out of people. They just don't do it, do they?
It's one of my biggest bugbears.
Really?
I think that people find themselves in business in a position of in a supervisory position, not having had any training. They just kind of arrive there, and not all businesses will support them in giving them training. and quite often, if we have an apprentice who in that probation period is struggling, it's not always that the apprentice isn't doing what they should be doing. It's that the employer isn't managing them.
Yes.
And it really is about managing. And so some of the work we do in that period isn't anything with the apprentice. It's about trying to kind of plant seeds for the employer or the manager or supervisor or whatever to actually do that role, perform that role. So quite a lot of times where an apprentice will go from a business admin, we do suggest that if they are going to be then maybe looking after the next apprentice in, maybe a supervision, leadership and supervision course would be appropriate.
So there are lots of different courses like that around, so there's quite a choice.
Yeah. And I think if we can support people in learning to manage, it's going to be a much better working environment. Yeah.
Because you also, I know in terms of talking to a lot of micro businesses, they say they want support and they need help and they need two pairs of hands, you know, they need everything they can. But the reality is when you say, well, what do you want done then? I don't think they really know.
No.
And that's quite difficult for them then.
Yes.
So you've got a young person there who's in a new environment and not quite sure what to do. You've got an employer thinking, I don't know why I've agreed to this, and actually I'm having to do it myself anyway.
Exactly.
It's all the ingredients are there for not a particularly good recipe, aren't
and
they?
I think that's why that whole recruitment, you know, the looking at what the job role is and where they will get the evidence for their qualification right at the very start. That's why that bit's so important, because you can reach a place in your business where you're busy, been there, done it, and think, oh, I need someone. But actually the reality of having somebody in is that you almost have to take a step back from the business to support their development initially. Yes. And then I'm sure it will fly. And often you kind of take that step back and realise that, you didn't need that task done. And if you kind of fine-tune the way you're working, you could probably
or maybe you should just actually do it, rather than because I mean I can imagine with people like hairdressing, which is obviously very popular. There's a very structured route in, isn't there? You're the Saturday person, and you sweep up and observe, and then you wash and gradually learn. But for a lot of the business admin, which is, I guess, one of the most popular categories,
it's
quite tricky, isn't it? Because it means different things to different people, doesn't it?
Yes, and the role can vary so much, and it can be sort of business admin based in finance, based in marketing, based in. So yes, it is about that that initial meeting where you look at the job role, and there's a skills scan that we sort of work through to just ensure that the young person will get the required learning in the role.
And then they've got more chance of staying, becoming valuable and learning from them, from each other, really.
Definitely.
Is it slave labour at times?
It's funny, there's going to be an element of, make the tea.
Yeah.
Say hello to, first point of contact with a customer. If the post needs taking out, they'll do it.
Yeah.
It's cheaper for the apprentice to do it, for the managing director to do it, so it's inevitable that that's going to happen. I think sometimes I have to kind of have that discussion with an apprentice to say that that's going to happen, because they kind of, they think it's outside of their job role. If it's not written down as a specific, then possibly. But there's always that all-encompassing, and whatever other duties at this level. And that's about knowing, being aware of that in the world of work. We do have quite a lot of families who are sort of second, third generation unemployed. So maybe if other family members haven't worked, they might not be getting the positive messages from home, possibly. It's just a period of adjustment.
Yes.
And I think as long as it's said in a kind of a nice way,
yes.
They're not being ordered to make the tea, then yes. And maybe, sometimes in a workplace, everyone goes and makes the tea. I don't think so, because you are learning the whole time. So yes, they're not getting paid a huge amount, but they are learning. They are having the benefit of that employer's experience, and as long as it's kept in a structured format and they're meeting their learning criteria, no, I don't think it is slave labour, and that there's a job or potential job at the end.
I was
going
to say, what sort of success rates do apprentices have?
They vary across the training providers. We always aim to work with employers who want to keep that person on at the end of it. Obviously, they go from their sort of £3.50 or whatever they're on to a higher salary, so they have to be seen to be of benefit at that point. I say to young people, it's a year to prove your worth. Make that company miss you when you're on holiday. Make that company wish you were there when it was, after your hours have finished. It can be down to them to kind of make that employer want to keep them on. Yeah.
So the employer, but that sort of answers the slave labour in the issue being, I want this work done and the role fulfilled.
Yes.
And if this young person turns out to be the right one, then that's fabulous.
Absolutely.
That's
and that does happen in so many cases. And quite often they will then look at further training for that young person, which, that's the ideal.
Yeah. And you're seeing more professional services start to look at apprentices and saying, actually, don't go to university, the likes of some of the big accountancy practices saying, we'll take the right attributes for a young person and train them.
The very first young person I recruited has just done his final accountancy course. So he started on a business admin and then did AAT all the way through. So, perfect. It hasn't been to uni, doesn't have the debt.
No.
Lived at home with mum and dad and earning, and probably in the business that he was in has seen some things that you would never see if you went to uni and sort of straight from there into a business.
And his liver is healthy.
And his liver is fine.
So it wins him all round, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So the final thing I was going to ask you, Jan, is one I've asked a few people. If you could put your arm round your shoulder as an 18-year-old again, what would you say to yourself, knowing now a bit more about life and experience?
I went to ballet school.
Did you really?
And was a professional ballet dancer. So.
So you were a professional ballet dancer?
Yes. What would I have said then? You see, I had a vocation and followed my dream. And to be fair, I I probably would have been a little wiser about the choices that I made with my career after I finished dancing. I don't think I would have changed anything at that point, because I think if you have one of those, it was a dream that nothing was going to stop me. So I think at that point I wouldn't have changed anything. But I think later, when I stopped dancing, I probably would have gone to university or retrained properly then, whereas I left that until my early 30s, when my son was small, to go to uni and kind of focus on a career. I sort of floated around in the interim years.
So you'd have been a bit more decisive.
Yes.
Because what age were you when you stopped ballet dancing then?
24, 23,
Okay.
24.
So then you drifted to
and I drifted
is
for a
too
little
strong
bit.
a word, but yeah.
Yes. I mean, drifted to some amazing places and worked for some of the big retail companies in London, ended up at the BBC World Service. So I drifted in quite nice circles, and I probably had some really good experiences. But I think if I'd have been a bit more structured about my approach then, but I think it would be a sad world if at 18 we couldn't follow our dreams.
No, absolutely. You were
Even
lucky
if
to
that
have one,
doesn't-
weren't you? As you'd said earlier, if
Yeah.
if you've got a vocation and a
Yes.
calling and that's what you want to
Yeah.
be, it's easy
Yeah.
in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's been fabulous, and thank you very much for your
Thank you.
time, Jen.
It's
It's
a
been
pleasure.
delightful to speak to you. I hope that helps everybody. What I will do at the bottom of the podcast is we'll have a link to Jan's website address. So any questions on apprentices, please just drop her a line, and I'm sure she'll be delighted to help. So until next time, thanks very much.